afraid of becoming someone else. Forgetting who I am.
You're already becoming someone else. Every second of every day.
Still, I feel a connection between who I was and who I'm turning into.
What you really fear is becoming someone you don't recognize in the least.
Good morning, Chooms, and welcome to Night City, because today on the Furidashi podcast, we are talking about Cyberpunk 2077. I am here with my best Choom, Lauren. Lauren, say fuck you to the folks.
Wow.
What? I'm just trying to get everybody in the mood for this game.
No, you guys are all preem individuals, except for the actual top tier preems. My chooms out there that are subscribed to our preem experience Patreon, thank you all so much. Our premium, if you will.
Premium. Yeah, by the way, so by the way, we have a Patreon. You can go over to patreon.com/Furidashi, where you can subscribe for $5 a month, sign up for our bonus episodes. Also, I recently made a slight change to our Patreon where if you want to, you can purchase the individual Furidashi classroom courses for a fixed fee. So that way, if you want that course content, but you don't necessarily want like the whole archive of everything that we've ever done, you don't necessarily have to do it that way anymore. So, Lauren, this is not our first time talking about Cyberpunk 2077, but the game, is it?
It is not our first time talking about the game. And yes, Cyberpunk 2077 is very hard to say, and every time I say it, I have to stare off into the far future and really enunciate every single syllable. It is not. The last time we spoke about Cyberpunk was in 2020, the year of our Lord in which it came out and no one could play it.
Yeah,
I did. I suffered. I had a PS4 copy after it bugging out on me and being unplayable. I rented/got a laptop from my boyfriend and then played that over Christmas instead of having him have his laptop that he could play over Christmas break.
That was very kind of you.
That was so kind of me. I truly am a premium friend, everybody. No, man, but it was his Christmas gift to me, if you will, because I had been looking forward to this game for so long. And so in 2020, it was a really different experience. We talked a lot about immersion. We talked about I think the game writ large.
Yeah, we talked a lot more about so for those who are interested, it's episode 7, Punk 2077 is the title of the episode if you want to go check it out. We also talked a lot about the context of Cyberpunk as a genre. I talked a little bit about the tabletop game. You talked about the experience of playing the video game, because I actually didn't have that much experience playing it at that point. Which is kind of why we wanted to revisit the game now that I have played it almost in its entirety. I didn't quite finish. And also because the game is very different now than it was way back then. It's much better. Much, much, much better.
No, it is. No, full stop. I think for me, what the most surprising thing is that I've actually been restarting a Cyberpunk save pretty much every year, a couple years or so.
Yeah.
Not as many times as Baldur's Gate 3, but enough times to be a little bit concerned, and mainly because it was a game that kept drawing me back into the experience.
Yeah.
And for today's episode, what we want to talk about is that pull, that draw of its aesthetic, visual presentation, and what I call living world design. Basically, the design of making the entire world fit into a paradigm, fit into a very strong themes and tone. So if you go back and watch our kind of Yuletide 2077 episode, I think that'll be a very good kind of overview of first impressions, right? Hot takes.
Yeah.
But now with my experience, I have actually played it. too many times, is it's going to be a lot more talking about like how we really nail, right, that environmental design.
Yeah,
and it's not
yeah.
and
Sorry,
just
go
really
ahead.
quickly, I was going to say it's not just like art, right? We talk about aesthetics here, and we have talked for this season about aesthetics, but aesthetics really is beyond just art, like
Yes.
artists making these calls,
Yeah.
right? So we're really going to kind of dive into like levels, art, systems, right? Tech, narrative, of course, right? Because you have these themes and tones and kind of stories, but it's not environmental storytelling, right? It's not the environment telling you something. It
No.
really is about that presentation. So this will be the focus of today's episode because Cyberpunk keeps pulling me back in, and patch 2.2 now, or 2.1 added a metro. So now there is a train
Yeah.
that you can take throughout that I still haven't taken because I restarted and just haven't unlocked that area yet because I, now being a veteran player, let's just say I try to make the lockdown in Watson last as long as possible before I go storm Arasaka because
well, from what I remember, and I may be wrong about this, but on release, the game didn't really have the fast travel system that it has now.
So on release, you were able to drive to fast travel points, right?
Yeah.
Just like any game. And once you found a spot to fast travel to, you could fast travel
Okay,
to
so
it.
it is basically the same as
It's
it
the
is now.
same. It's the
Okay.
same as it was now. Yeah.
Okay.
The thing is that in the past, we didn't have the metro, and
Yeah.
we didn't have. Well, honestly, because I played in 2.0, and the metro was released in 2.1,
Yeah.
right? And so now I'm playing on 2.2, but we did have fast travel just like that. You had to unlock
Okay.
it.
Because one of the things that is, I think, really important about the game is the way in which it kind of forces you, in my experience, sometimes frustratingly, to actually like move through the city. Because even though, like, in terms of the storyline, the game is very much focused on this, like, you have little time left in your life, so what are you going to do with it? Like, what is the really spectacular thing that you're going to do to give your life meaning? And it keeps telling you that that's what the game is about. But to me, that's kind of really not what the game is about. The game is actually about the city, the construct of the city, and it's also its outer environs, because you're not always like in the city proper. But the fact that like it forces you to move through it in particular ways. And even though I think the driving mechanics, especially on PC, are kind of clunky, like even with that, I noticed at one point, this was after I did the like initial Pan Am quests in like the outskirts of the city, where my initial impulse was to like go to a fast travel point and just like go back to like wherever it was that I had been previously. But then I just decided randomly to sort of like hop on the bike that she gives you at that point and just drive back into the city. And even though I don't like the driving mechanics, like the experience of driving into the city was really, really fantastic, because you got to see the way in which they have like constructed this organic, and not organic because it's programmed, but a seamless environment where like you see the changes from like the low lying areas in the outskirts of the city to sort of like, mid-rise buildings to high-rise buildings to different districts and so forth. And that experience of moving through them, especially because it's Night City, when you're playing at night, all of the color and the light and like just the visual, like the dynamic lighting in the game, because it now uses DLSS, is really amazing. Like that is the experience of the game for me. And then that also, we can maybe talk about this in a little bit, but also the way and then encounter design works in the game forces you to have a similar experience where you're actually moving through the environments and observing them as you engage in just ordinary gameplay.
I think for me, what you hit on there is you get the bike from Pan Am, and the point, the urge you're supposed to feel is to ride that bike,
Yeah.
right? And I think that it's a really clever kind of use of mechanics there, because to users who are not immersed and are not appreciative already, I think, of the visual aesthetics, or they're speedrunning, just so we're clear, because you can appreciate the visuals a lot and are like, no, I'm a veteran player, I am speedrunning, because I have played that quest 3 or 4 times now, is that on the first instinct, I grab that bike and I go, right? And there's something really nice in the story about this as well, because one, it is a free bike. And two, it does replace your Jackie bike.
Oh, Jackie. Oh man.
Okay. No. It's a very clever, small, subtle use here to choose to give you a bike versus, say, like a Roadhog, which is usually what nomads drive. And it's your first time re-entering Night City on a bike that is not Jackie's bike. That is now your bike. That is now your story of Cyberpunk 2077. It is now you're making a name for yourself / your like kind of first mission-ish outside the city, right? And it draws you back in. So that's kind of like when I talk about aesthetics, right? I talk about what is the kind of player's story that they're telling themselves in their head, even if they're not conscious of it. And for me, that level of kind of unconscious bias for you to be like, man, I wanted to fast travel, because you do. The first time I played it, I was like, I just need to get back there.
Yeah.
Then you look off, you already are onto the bike. You look off into the horizon, and now the horizons are beautiful. And back then, even they weren't as beautiful, right? but even then, I was like, I'm gonna ride this damn bike home. And like immediately, home is Night City. This damn bike, it's new, it's yours. You've made another friend. It's Pan Am, right? And as playing a female bee, she is like your bestie. That's fine. Let's move on.
Yeah, it is what it is.
And very upset, but it's okay. It's okay. I'll just calm down. There's that, and then second, right, is you're driving all the way through, because it is now your official entry into Night City. And if you've never played as a nomad, and even actually if you have played as nomad, when you're driving towards Night City, like Jackie drives you into Night City and then it cuts to a cinematic. You've actually never at this point ish. I'm going to say ish here because obviously it's an open world and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It within reason. It's not a true sandbox. You can. This is your first time going into Night City and driving it as well.
Yeah.
So like all of those subconscious things, right, are actually floating in our heads for us to say, let's go back and not fast travel, despite the fact you have unlocked a fast travel. And for those mechanics nerds out there, there are other fast travel points within the Badlands to unlock if you take the bike.
Yeah.
So for anybody who is even speed running, they too might ride the bike home because they need to unlock other fast travel.
And it's also like, I don't know, I found the experience of riding the bike to be far more enjoyable and a lot less frustrating than the enclosed vehicles, than the cars and trucks, simply because one, the acceleration on it is much better, the handling is pretty decent, and it's much more maneuverable because it's much smaller. So like, if you're about to run into something, you can avoid it much more easily.
Yes.
And also, like, if you use the alternative camera modes, not the first person one, it just looks cooler. Like, I'm just gonna put my cards on the table. It looks more badass. Whereas the external camera on the vehicles, you're just looking at the vehicle, and it's like,
I am 100% a racer in first person in Cyberpunk 2077. I played the entire first game. Yes, you heard me. The entire first 2020 game. First person, 100%. First person in my car, first person in my bike. And I did those races in first person. Okay? I did that.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I cleared them all.
Yeah.
Ugh, okay. Was it rough? Yes. Was it also already a little buggy, though, for everyone involved? Yes.
Yeah.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly there. The first person camera on vehicles and bikes, I can't do it any other way.
Oh, so no, I was making a distinction there. It's that I think the third person camera on the bike is actually better than the first person, and I think the third person on the cars is worse.
I see. I don't agree with you, and I think
fine.
that for aesthetic purposes, everyone should be driving in first person, and you should just suffer during those races.
Well, I mean, because the thing is, like, so with the third person camera, also then is a freer camera because it's not using the mouse. Then becomes about like positioning the camera rather than positioning your particular perspective in first person mode. And I like that because it just means that, like, as you're, those long stretches, especially as you're coming into Night City, or even like the longer, just like straight roads where you can really pick up speed on the bike, then you can you can push the camera into a profile perspective where you see yourself racing against like this parallax background of the rest of the city, and it's just really beautiful. And so from like the aesthetic experience of seeing yourself, seeing your character in this world, like I really appreciated the ability to do that, even though, you know, otherwise you play most of the game in first person. Like when you're like engaged in combat, you don't really have
I
another
guess
option for
so.
camera.
That's exactly. So that's fair. Is that when I do want to appreciate the city, I do back out to third person, right?
Yeah.
But that's for me, it's not a functional, like you said, it's not functional. It is aesthetic,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
I
Yeah.
want to see the entire experience. And so driving back, I do remember driving first person and being like, holy shit, this is fantastic. And then backing out, right?
Yeah.
To third person. And then eventually almost crashing and then backing back in because my brain is apparently psychotic. I can only drive these games first person now.
Yeah, because if I had one critique of that particular thing in the game, it's that there's so much invested in terms of like outfits and like clothing that your character can wear, and you get so few opportunities to see your character, your V, in this world. And so like if you've put all this effort into, like, there's literally an entire outfit system, and if you go through like the effort of putting together an outfit that you wear consistently or switching between outfits, 9 times out of 10 you're not going to see it. And I think that's, I mean, and
It's
it's a little frustrating because like it is actually fairly common now, especially in action RPGs, where you can choose to play either in first person or in third person for like the entirety of the game. I can understand why they probably chose not to do that in this game, because constraining your perspective is an important part of a lot of the like dialogue thing, you know, moments that you have. And so there's a trade-off there, and I understand what that trade-off is. It's just like I said, it makes me a little sad because there are so many of these things that if you had more third person moments, then there would be payoff for that in terms of like how you like actually visually create your character.
I think for me, let's actually dig into that
Yeah.
because when we look at the first person perspective,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of affordances that come to the perspective of that. And I think that really briefly touching on the outfits, aesthetically, the outfit is now kind of almost psychology of I'm going to this area of Night City. I want to fit in or like, you know, look like this so that it feels right, like I am a part of that kind of element of Night City.
Yeah.
But then what's conversely, all you see are your arms in first person.
Yeah.
And if you have mantis blades, all of your sleeves are always rolled up because, you know, for reasons.
Yeah.
Or if you have gorilla arms, I don't know in the new patch because they added in so much stuff from the Cyberpunk anime Edgerunners.
Yeah.
But I think with gorilla arms, you actually also have your sleeves rolled up as well.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
So
I
I think
believe
that
so.
any arm thing is going to make you not even see, like, say, a suit jacket when you go meet Hanako.
Yeah.
Right? You're just going to see your mantis blades. And then already you look like a killer. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I think that for me, right, the role playing switch is why I use the outfits. But I agree here that I hate that I can't see them in any of the cutscenes.
Yeah.
All right. However, the perspective of the first person perspective, I think, is used really well in Cyberpunk 2077.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that talking about that type of subjectivity, right, in the aesthetic presentation, I almost feel like things feel more visceral, sometimes discordantly too visceral, right? Where you
Yeah.
talk about the stories like you have the last week of your life to live, except this is a sandbox and you can take as long as you want. Right?
True.
So
Yeah. And so
so there
that,
is this
yeah.
discordance there, but I'd love to talk more about that perspective for you, right? Because there are seems to be some design choices that are now fighting, right, with this really good aesthetic perspective.
Yeah, I think it's more that like they didn't quite commit to one or the other. They wanted to have it both ways, and that just means that for the third person side of things, it gets downplayed a lot throughout the game. Like it's not quite as there for me. But the thing is because the game is in many ways drawing from, it is not itself an immersive sim, but it is definitely drawing from that tradition. You know, games like Thief or Deus Ex, which this game references constantly, um, where like the first person perspective in those games is very much about the sort of like constraining perspective as a way to sort of visually immerse. And even though there are other things that are sort of like important to immersive sims, like, being able to like accomplish the same thing in many different ways, a lot of like alternative character progression paths, and Cyberpunk has those as well. But the constrained perspective is something that is really important. And one of these days, those chapters, that book will see the light of day. I just don't know how it's going to at this point. But I wrote a lot about this in the summer of, well, actually throughout 2022, when I was kind of cooped up in my house and trying to like get my health straightened out. I spent a lot of time just sitting at my laptop thinking about like the way in which constrained perspective works in first person games. And what's interesting about this particular example is that what's cool is how, okay, so just putting my cards on on the table. I'm doing a Netrunner. And the Netrunner gameplay kind of compels you to look at the environment very differently than if you were a melee or just like ordinary ranged character with a gun. And it kind of compels you to look at all of the aspects of the scenery around you. You want to identify where objects that you can possibly blow up are. You want to identify where all the cameras are. You want to identify all of the individuals that you can see from a distance, so that way you can upload quick hacks to them before they even see you, because you get a lot of damage bonuses as a result. And because your perspective is constrained, and also because you've chosen this particular like route for how you want to build your character, it then sort of like those two things are meshing really well, because it wants you to look at the world in a certain way. It builds gameplay mechanics that buttress that, and then also an environment that is really well suited to encapsulating it, because this is an extremely dense Hong Kong like city. As a result, it means that there's a lot of cover, there's a lot of narrow alleys, there's a lot of like places where you have to sneak around, and you have to kind of like look through tiny little slits so that you can see whoever it is that you want to take out. And as a result of like those three things working together, like the environments plus the like the perspective plus the play style, like those two things are all hitting on like the same beat. But then you have these, but like then again, the frustration comes in that the third person stuff seems to sort of like take you out of that. It's sort of like pushing against the more immersive aspects of the game.
Yeah, and I really like that kind of dichotomy here, because what I found when playing, like you said, a lot of action RPGs tend to have both cameras.
Yeah.
So what I found a lot of the times playing Skyrim was playing it in third person. It feels weird. It doesn't feel correct, to me at least, to play in third person, particularly like an archer, right?
Yeah.
Or even like a spellcaster, because like you need that first person perspective. But then playing melee, I was like, okay, I can see that 3 enemies are rushing to me now.
Yeah.
Versus before, you could only play, or you could only see like one.
Yeah.
But the first person constrained perspective kind of forced you to kind of single target, versus third person was multi-target. And for Cyberpunk, right, looking at it, let's just break that down there. For in combat, they don't have that. I think that was a wise choice, like you mentioned, because the Netrunner, which was also my first class, was a street kid Netrunner, is just this really fascinating to be like self-preservation is key. Like Netrunners cannot get.
Oh no, you can't take any damage.
You cannot take any damage. I was more of like a hybrid Netrunner, because back in 2020, it wasn't as clear, like of a dividing line between, you could both be James Bond and a Netrunner in 2020.
Yeah.
So you can still do that, but you sacrifice, I think, maybe you sacrifice less now. You just have to reach a higher level now, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's that like you can go full int and still have plenty left over to sort of like partially specialize in something else.
Yeah, to partially specialize.
So I tended to go more the Netrunner / Shinobi route, which is just more, sneaking around and like taking people out from distance. But you could actually make a tankier Netrunner that uses more of the like the smart weapon side of the int tree, because smart weapons are kind of overpowered, especially at close range. They're really crap at long range. But if you build a slightly tankier character by putting more into reflexes and into body, and then also like building your cyberware around that with less focus on like quick hacks, you could actually build a netrunner that is not tanky, but tanky enough where like even if you have some like the harder cyber psychos, like if they get on top of you, usually will kill you as like a regular netrunner. But you could actually probably survive some of those like dicier encounters using an alternative build.
Yeah, so I did a primarily netrunner build. This was before like the true shinobi was around, Nicholas. And so when I talk about a hybrid netrunner, I was netrunner full time, maybe silenced pistols because I was able to go into cool.
Yeah.
And then I also had blades. So like I was a 3-kit wonder, but my netrunner skill was pretty much all the way to the top. And then my cool was slightly halfway. And then my reflexes was all the way to be mantis blade. So when shit hit the fan, I just mantis bladed in people's faces. And I just ran around and was like, please, I hope I don't get hit. And because I had already exploded all the barrels and done all of those things, it was a very much shit has hit the fan and I need to go. And so it was really basically making people explode themselves. But then the cyber psycho fights, it's just dash, please get blind for a moment. I'm going to slice your face up for a lot of damage. And then I'm going to run and then I'm going to just wait forever. So I think that this is all to kind of talk about, though, that in multiple builds, they all require this kind of fixed mentality of thinking about how you use your environment. And for me, I agree. I think the Netrunner was a really great way to use the environment and like kind of understand the atmosphere of the situations. Like, where are the enemies? How do I target them? You play a lot of your life in vents, or at least I did. So a lot of it was looking through the slits and going like, okay, I can see 4 of them here. I can see 5 of them here.
Yeah.
And in trying to change my playstyle from the Netrunner, it was a huge learning curve for me doing my Corpo Night City run, because I was like, no, I'm going to do a gunner. I'm going to be in body. So I'm going to be like always gunner. And then if someone gets close, I'll just punch them. Totally different, very tanky. And I actually found out that trying to identify where all my enemies were kind of beforehand hurt, because when you're doing that play style, the enemies will absolutely move because now you're combat focused, right? So it doesn't matter where they were anymore. What matters is where they're like are and or where they're going to be. So now I ended up having to like completely interact differently, even though my kind of like perspective, it almost seemed to change, is what I'm trying to say, because of the interactions that I were doing.
Yeah, because if you wanted to do more of like I mean, this isn't necessarily a specific build, but if you wanted to do a more body focused build, as if you were like role playing a cyber psycho yourself, then that playstyle is very much about like running in as quickly as possible, mitigating damage, because there's a lot in the body tree for just like raw damage mitigation. And then if you go like body reflexes, then not only are you going to like have a lot of like damage mitigation, also you'll be far less susceptible to ranged damage, because reflexes is really good for basically not getting hit from ranged. And so if you wanted to be that person who just like runs in, Hulk smashes everything, and then gets out, you can be. But but like you said, that's completely different.
Completely different. So I know that last episode when we did this, 121 episodes ago, we were talking a lot about the combats and those mechanics, right? And I think that the reason why we're bringing it up again here is to now talk about the visual presentation of those mechanics to you, now that we've kind of, and Nicholas also has had a chance to kind of view the aesthetics of the world. Because for me, moving away from, say, the combat interactions and just to that perspective and that atmosphere, is that the third-person perspective completely takes you out of, say, being right, fighting for their life in Night City, but puts you into such a beautiful kind of like, I don't know, a beautiful kind of visual environment, right? That gives me the quality of, this is why you live in Night City, versus like, gosh, every day is a fight, or like, man, it's so dirty here, or like, oh, I can hear the very bad localized accent that they have trying to do here, right? And if you do want, I do have a video of like the one instance where I found in Cyberpunk, which I absolutely bless that writer and writing team, where there is someone who puts on a fake Japanese accent. And then as soon as you, as a city kid, call out, that's not what people sound like around here, they will drop it. And if you are not a street kid, you do not get that.
Yeah, I noticed that it was this.
And I love that so much because you can't call them out on it if you're not from there. And also you can't call them out of it if you're a corpo, like, which is also, anyway, moving back.
Well, no, actually I'm going to defend that design decision from a purely like storytelling perspective, because of the fact that like, okay, so something about Cyberpunk, the tabletop game, as a kind of like historical phenomenon is that it has its origins in a period where like Japanese business and Japanese business practices were held on this absurd pedestal
Yes.
in the 80s. But at the same time, there was also something like deeply racist about it, because it had this extremely blinkered view of what Japanese culture is like. So at the same time, it's valorizing Japanese culture, it's also making like extremely like stereotyped and oftentimes bigoted judgments about it. So it would make sense that someone who is like in that corporate mindset, who like idolizes Arasaka as this like pinnacle of business, wouldn't actually have that sense of like what the broader underlying culture is actually like.
Exactly. And like I wasn't actually trying to contrariize, like I wasn't trying to be opposed to that. What I was saying is that like, because it is Cyberpunk 2077 is rooted right in that time frame in which it was created.
Yeah.
And in that time frame of both the idolization of Japanese culture and Japanese, and this is in heavy scare quotes, and Japanese like company business practices, and also the fear of them, right?
Yes, the fear is a very big part of it.
Fear is a huge thing that you can see throughout it. So this is why we're talking about the aesthetics, right, of this experience versus, say, the nature of the storytelling of it, because that is in an episode of itself, right? Is like what Cyberpunk 2077 maybe perhaps should have modernized instead of saying super true to its original contextual backbone. But then that could be an argument as well, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that in order for us to get this weird theme and tone of the world itself having that factionalized conflict and uncomfortableness, right?
Yeah.
With how this is not what Japanese sounds like, guys. Like, you are obviously being wrong here. Like, you don't get that tone, right? And that theme through a dialogue option, but you don't get that tone or that theme without having the acknowledgement, right? And it there to begin with.
Well, because the thing is, like, so speaking from a vibes perspective, not just sort of like the visual design of the environment, but the way in which like this world is peopled, because there are lots of different kinds of people in this world, and they are very important to sort of like the environmental construction as well. That it's a very multicultural environment. This game is woke, friends. It's very woke. Well, it's very woke in some ways and very unwoke in others. It's kind of strange.
Yes, it is very strange. It is very strange.
The sexual politics of the game, which is something that we did talk about in the Yule Punk episode, are confused at best. But one of the things that it nails is this sort of like cultural context of California. I actually want to talk a little bit about California.
Oh my goodness, no.
I know you don't want to because you live there.
That's fine.
But the thing is, okay, so looking at it from the visual perspective, the fact that like one of the things that I think the game captures really well in a fairly small map, not a small map, but in a fairly constrained map, is the way in which like the environment of a Californian city and then like the California rural landscape are completely different things. Like if you're driving between like LA and San Francisco, how like once you get out of LA County, you might as well be in the wilderness until you get to like, you know, the outside Bay Area. And the fact that like it somehow manages to capture like in all of the nomad areas, like the dusty desert where nothing fucking grows and it's like windy and it like that's kind of like you could feel like you're covered in sand. Even though it's a video game, you feel like everything is just going to be like the grossness of the city is very different from like the grossness of the rural environments of the game. And I think the fact that the game has that explicit contrast is really, really key, even though it doesn't necessarily look exactly like the part of California where like Night City is supposedly is located.
So, okay, we can talk about this portion of California isms because I want to call it a California ism. An ism is basically, right? Ism is basically like not a recreation of a space, but a vibes, right? Of a space.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think what's really great about this is that, especially with the addition of the Metro, originally playing this game, I had just actually come back from a trip in Los Angeles, like a year prior. So like 2020 January or 2019, right? Like the I was gonna say summer, but I mean winter. Anyway, guys, whatever seasons. It's a California-isms. It's always nice weather, but also really grimy.
Well, except for San Francisco, which often does not have the greatest.
Oh, San Francisco has much better weather now that I guess global warming is a thing. This is terrible. We're moving on. But point being is, so I finally played the Nomad run, and I'm actually kind of excited because they do put Night City in the middle of the state. So the Bay Area is not where Night City is, and it's also not in LA. Like LA is so far away from where they put Night City.
Yeah.
I'm not so far away, but like pretty decently far. And where they've actually put kind of like the Night City-ish location is not what the entire environment in a Night City would look like, because it's a little bit closer to like Monterey, Big Sur, Paso Robles. Like these are, it's wine country, guys. They basically put this in wine country when you look at it on a map. And that's actually a very richly dense agricultural area. California is one of the largest producers of like just food. So it actually is very, I wouldn't say green. It's very brown, and then the plants are very lush.
Well, right? Because it's irrigated. It's right? It's not natural farmland.
It's not exactly. Now, actually, here's a bigger thing to say is it's not just wine country because it is fruit grows there. It's the headquarters of Driscoll. Okay, so Driscoll's raspberries, blackberries. Like when you go to the store and you see a Driscoll's, that's where it is. All right. Yeah. So I'm telling you this right because in a Californianism way, every single district of Night City really does work well to invoke an area of California-isms.
Exactly,
and I think that the dichotomy of whenever I drive to LA, and really actually you drive south of LA or like west of LA, east, you drive west into the ocean.
Yeah, I was going to say
you drive west into the ocean.
If you're talking about the desert, that would be east.
The desert, whenever you drive east, right, towards like Death Valley, and you drive east just of like Los Angeles in general, those areas are what really, really struck me as like that feels more like nomad land. Yeah. Versus I think as a Californianism, if California is no longer producing agriculture in those areas, it is very barren going on the 5 down to LA because it would be hilly and full of like cool rocks and stuff. Like it would no longer, right, be natural, cultivated, kind of irrigated farmland.
Yeah.
And so I can see that in the dichotomy, right, where they're going, hey, everyone's now eating more like processed foods, or we're somehow getting our foods from a farm north or south of us, wherever they've decided to put it, right? It's all just going straight in trucks to the city because that's where everybody is. And these nomads have to live off the land, have to figure things out when all of this land that used to be, right, involved in agriculture is now something that has been used for them. And I think the Californianism of the aesthetic, right, matches that kind of theme of, well, of course you want to be in Night City, right? Everything's happening in a city.
Yeah.
Why would you want to live on your own in like a wolf pack? Like there is nothing outside the city. And that's right, the theme and the tone that you get, right? Going back to that Pan Am thing, that then through the story, through the game, you really discover in one ending particularly, right? You can discover that no, the city is corrupt. Like, yes, there's a lot there, but actually you get happiness, you get like freedom, right? You get honesty outside in the rural America.
You get a sense of community. And I think one of the things that the game does try to emphasize is that like the advantage that the clans have, the nomad clans have, is that they are, they have a sort of like an old school, like tribal structure to them, more or less, even though it's more like a found family than it is necessarily like strictly tribal. And as a result of that, like they are very tight knit. They're very like they always have each other's backs. Whereas like when you're in the city, you're constantly having to deal with like a sense of betrayal. I mean, it's the problem of the sort of like the exceptional atomized individual, which is sort of the role that you're forced to adopt as V in this game. And that's what Johnny is constantly trying to push you to be, is like, how are you going to define yourself in this world? But the problem is that that's not really well suited towards having like stable, committed relationships with other people. And part of the reason why, as you learn very early in the game with what happens to Jackie, is that like if you get really close to someone who is your partner in crime, quite literally, like there's a real possibility that they'll just get killed. They'll just die.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to have those stable, and also like there's a real possibility that you'll get killed. So you're always like teetering on the edge of like finding connections with people, but almost can't quite go all the way, precisely because of the way in which the social structure of the city is defined, as opposed to say like the social structure outside of the city is defined.
I actually love that we're talking about the social structures of the game, because I think that's what really lends itself to the overall living world of the experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as much as I would love to talk about how to kind of design, how I think Cyberpunk 2077 did a fantastic job of designing this type of identity like creation process through their game, that also could be another episode. And so I'm going to briefly talk about how when you start as a nomad, you start as someone who basically blatantly says there is no clan that I am a part of, right? And then through the game, my boyfriend played the nomad and then ended on what is the star ending, so not to spoil it, and basically rejoins, right? Goes back to like nomadacy.
Yeah.
And it's because it is hey, the corporations, the city is the problem, and I don't want to be a part of it. Let me figure out something on my own, which sounds like an individualist American mentality. I've got this on my own. I'm not going to trust no government or corporate entity. But then, like, is actually the only ending I feel that gives you that sense of camaraderie and community. On the flip side, if you choose a street kid or a corpro kind of like, say, you start in the city, it is much easier for you to go, yeah, I can't figure this out on my own. I do need to hire more expensive people, better people. I'm going to take it straight to them. But the only way to do that is I can't really trust anyone else unless they're already a part of the game, right? I can get them to trust me, and I don't care if they die.
Yeah.
Oh, and I hate that. Sorry. So that's my pitch for how choosing your background does actually influence your choice of which ending you get, despite all of the guides telling you it doesn't really depend. It doesn't really influence anything.
It clearly matters.
I think it clearly matters in a psychological sense, right? So moving into that psychology, right? In that vein, I think that when we look at the living world, we can actually see different types of like living world. I was going to say AI behaviors, but I mean AI in the sense of traditional video game artificial intelligent code that is running for these individuals. And I think you can actually see that within the city itself, each district, right, in those Californianisms, every single kind of like non-player character actually influences kind of the world around it, and they actually behave differently as well. Like the nomads' activities outside the city versus if you go to like I was going to call it Griffith Park, but I think that's the actual location it's based off of in California. The LA mansion.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Wait, I have the map of Night City right in front of me.
I can't remember what it's called.
Westbrook. I actually do
Westbrook,
have Westbrook. If you go to Westbrook, which is basically like the LA Hills / I actually do have the map of Night City in front of me. I'm not kidding. It's hanging on my wall. If you go to Westbrook, right, versus Santo Domingo, you actually won't see anybody outside in Westbrook. You'll see someone, maybe one individual, and it's because everyone lives in houses. And if you drive around the suburban area, you're not going to see people walking around. But if you go to Santo Domingo, that is also very spread out, but people are talking on the street, constantly in a convenience store. They're also all driving, right? And I think that's what I'm talking about here. When I talk about living world, it's about matching, right? The density of both NPCs, matching the density of spaces, right? To the also, it's not just, right, the environment. Like we keep talking about this over and over. but the environment itself is like the sum of all of those pieces.
Yeah. And I can't emphasize that enough, that like and it's even one of the things that you can actively control in the settings of the game, is how like population dense the city itself is. It's mostly a performance thing where you can turn it down if you're having performance issues.
Oh yeah, I had to turn it so down.
But if your hardware can handle it, if you turn that all the way up, like the city feels really inhabited. And this was especially on my mind as I was playing, because the game that I had just finished, I think a week ago, is Avowed, the most recent Obsidian game, which if you guys listened to a previous Furidashi episode, you guys would know I was really excited for, slightly disappointed by. And one of the things that I was disappointed by is that it has all of these really open, lush environments, and there's just not anything in it. Like there aren't creatures, there's not people. Like, I mean, essentially what's there is what's needed for the various like encounters that exist in the game. But most of the time I found myself like going through the environments just to find like random chests that were peppered all over the place. It didn't really feel populated. And whereas this game felt populated. And it was in playing Cyberpunk 2077 that I realized that how important that is of a component to environmental design. Because the thing is, the game doesn't necessarily have levels in the strict sense. It goes more like the GTA route, where sort of like encounters are mapped onto like particular like closed environments that are situated within the bigger map. But it isn't, strictly speaking, like you're not like loading a new zone, loading a new zone, loading a new zone, loading a new zone, loading a new zone. Like it is continuous. And so I think that does give it a much different feel. Whereas if you're designing a game where that sort of immersive element is an extremely important component, then your environmental design really has to be multifaceted in this way, where it's not just like it's how you populate things. It's about like the social relationships that you create amongst the NPCs that you populate the world with. It's about the way in which the gameplay, I guess, options that you have as your avatar then interface with that environment. And then it's also about sort of like the particular like personal character perspective that you get on it, in the form of like your background, in the form of like the relations that you cultivate, and so forth and so forth. Like when all of those things are working together, and that's a very hard game to make. That is an extremely hard game to make. But when it works, it really fucking works.
Yeah. I would love to hear your opinion more as well on that kind of concert, right? Of everything working together. Because I have played this so many times, and I talked about it a lot in our last episode that we did. So I'd love to kind of hear what is one moment for you where that kind of concert of things really came together?
I think it was the first time that I decided to really commit to a Netrunner build, because up until that point, I was sort of like trying a bunch of different things, like mix and matching, like melee plus range stuff. And so then like I reset all my points and I just went full Netrunner. It was around, let's see, when would that have been? Like near the beginning of Act 1 when I decided to do that. And then like working with like those sort of initial missions with Jackie, especially the ones leading up to the heist. I believe it was the one where you have to like go into like the really high-end hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, so it actually was the heist itself, but it was like the initial stages of the heist. And the fact that like, I'm moving around. Like earlier you had seen Yorinobu's apartment from the perspective of the BD that you have to like go into and analyze, the brain dance that you analyze. And then you see the apartment for itself later on. And the fact that like once I was then in the apartment, I found myself like scanning literally absolutely everything. And then sort of like the fact that I'm then seeing everything in that environment, both sort of like in like a regular visual perspective, from the scan perspective, but then I also remember seeing it from like the heat mapping, from the brain dance, that like all of those things then start to like layer on top of each other. And that's where the game really clicked for me. Up to that point, I actually kind of had to force myself to play because I knew we were going to be talking about it today. But at that moment, I was like, okay, there's been a lot of setup to get to a point where now I am finally seeing that like there had to be these layers. And once all of the layers of the cake are in place, then I can get the full experience. Whereas the problem, I think, in the initial stages of the game for the first couple of hours really is that you're only ever experiencing one of those layers. And by themselves, like just sort of like the combat tutorial, just like a stealth tutorial, that's not really giving you the experience of the game, because the experience of the game, the immersive quality of it, is going in, understanding what all of those like multiple aspects are, and then using, not just sort of seeing them in concert, but using them in concert. Because the thing is, like, me analyzing the environment, or the scene where when Saburo is murdered by his son, like you're constrained in this little closet, and you literally see like his face as he's like shoving his father up against the glass of the display, and feeling trapped, feeling like you have to look on, but you can't do anything about it. That was really cool, because it's very different from a similar experience, say like in BioShock, where you encounter Ryan for the first time, and then you know he uses the magic words, and then all of a sudden like control is taken away from you. Sorry, no, Atlas. Well, though he uses the magic words, but it's the thing that Atlas has implanted in you. And like that moment that everybody points to is like, oh, wow, it's so cool. But the thing is like, but that's not really telling you anything about the character and the situation that they've been put in. Whereas the fact that you've had to hide in this little closet where you can see on the other side of the screen, and like all of these things, these really important events are transpiring around you, but you're, one, not powerful enough to do anything about it, but also two, you have to hide because you're there to steal something from these individuals. Like all of that is so then like what is happening in the story is pointing to what your character are having to do, and like the way the power is taken away from you in a game that is very much a power fantasy. And it's a very good one, but it still is a power fantasy. The moments where like the game is telling you that you can't necessarily do anything about this situation, like that reminds you of the ways in which you have been powerful throughout the game, but even in your strength and in like the qualities of your character, you're still not necessarily on the level of these like prime movers within the universe. And that's also then reinforced in the interlude where you play as Johnny, and like he's just absurdly overpowered. Like he just one-shots everything.
Yeah, but like that was as Keanu Reeves should just one-shot everything.
But that's the thing, is that it's then a reflection back on your own character, and you're like, oh, okay. like the really important figures in this world, like they would decimate me. Like I'm a bug.
Yeah, I do feel bad about interrupting you there, because I think that one of the most important points that you kind of made to sum up all of that concerto was this layering effect of every single kind of mechanic, every single system. And that is why I love that first section of Cyberpunk 2077 so much, is that it isn't until you get to that moment. And for me, you can look away. You can move your camera to be like, actually, I don't want to see this. And then you just are staring at
it. You can still hear it. You can't not hear it.
You can hear it, but you're like, no, I'm not there. An alternative, right, is that you can also just press L1 and just be in the Kiroshi mode the entire time. So now instead of like really witnessing it, it's like somewhat glitched out. And as you can see, I did all of these things. I did that so much, right? That I was like, okay, I don't want to watch this again. So you can actually read about the bios. And like you can also see kind of the bio change in L1 as you like go off and on him, because once he's alive, it's like he's currently here, and then he's dead, and then like it just says he's dead. And you go to his son, and the son is like, I'm now the head, and then you're like, oh fuck, my eyes are updating in real time.
It's like, oh wait, I'm blind right now. Whoops.
Whoops. Right? Like it's just such a really good layering effect that I think that with that kind of like culmination, right? We showed, right, kind of how all of these things kind of come together, because it makes it feel alive, right? Like the word feels alive. But I think for me, what really sells it, and why I am always frustrated that I keep coming back to it. I mean, I'm happy about it, guys, but there are so many other games out there to play. That I also, right, like you said, feel alive in it. I feel like I have control, even in the situations where they've put me into a space where something has been done to me, or I don't have the choices. Right?
Yeah.
But in fact, I can just like I would as a real person if you watched someone get murdered for some unholy reason and you are trapped because you were also stealing from them. If this situation ever happens to you, please don't tell me about it. You can choose, right, to look away. And I think that's the difference and the quality of playing a BioShock, which is that first person kind of like choice and consequence game versus Cyberpunk kind of 2077, which is more of an immersive sim.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we should wrap things up right there, because one of the things that we're going to be talking about in our Patreon episode, by the way, that's patreon.com/Furidashi if you want to sign up for that, is we're going to be talking about action role-playing games in general. And I think I want to leave on that immersive point, because there is a kind of irony in Cyberpunk where the feeling of immersion in the game is actually highly dependent upon all of those moments when it actually takes you, the player, out of your avatar. And
yes.
So when you experience like the glitching of your various like cyberware implants, or like when a netrunner attacks you and you suddenly go blind, or the fact that like, you know, your brain as V is inhabited by this engram of Johnny Silverhand, and like the things that he does to you as you, when like sort of he comes to the initial realization that he is like inside of your head, like all of that stuff, the throwing up, and the way the throwing up is then sort of like analogous to some of the things that you see in the ads throughout the game, like all of those things that like interestingly alienate you from the avatar actually cause you to experience it more viscerally than if it was just like, okay, you have this constrained perspective this entire time, you're always inside of this character's head, the character is a blank and you, the player, inhabit them. That is strangely less immersive than what we get here. And so with that, I want to leave you all. Lauren, do you have anything else to add before we go?
No, I have nothing else to add. I think that was a great wrap up. Once again, Chooms, see you out there. Thank you so much for attending today's Furidashi Night City Radio.